The crash that changed everything. The sky above the alien moon was burning. Jack's ship spiraled downward, smoke trailing from its left wing. Alarms blared in his ears as he fought the controls. "Come on, hold together," he whispered, gripping the joystick tightly, but the engine had already given up. His small recon craft slammed into the rocky surface, sending metal and dust flying everywhere. Everything went dark. When Jack woke up, pain crawled through his ribs. He tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy. His vision cleared just enough to see his ship, what was left of it. Fire flickered from the broken engines. The radio was dead. His emergency beacon smashed. He was alone on an unknown world, except he wasn't. Voices echoed from the cliffs above, sharp and strange. Figures moved toward him, tall, armored beings with glowing eyes and weapons drawn. Aliens, not just any aliens, Zyrene warriors. And at their head was one who stood taller than the rest. With silver markings on her armor and cold eyes that locked on his face, she was there. Leader, and she was not smiling. Jack raised his hands as they surrounded him. His pulse thudded in his ears, but he kept calm. "Human," the tall one said, her voice like metal scraping rock. "You are our prisoner now." Jack didn't resist. There was no point, not when 10 weapons were pointed at him. And not when his body was already broken. They tied his hands, blindfolded him, and dragged him across the rocky terrain. Hours passed, maybe days. He was dumped into a cold metal cell. Barely wide enough to stretch his legs, light flickered above him, casting shadows on the walls. No one spoke to him, not at first, but he wasn't alone. In the far corner, a small creature whimpered, an alien child, wounded and left in the dark. Its leg was twisted, skin bruised, eyes full of fear. Jack inched closer and whispered, "It's okay, I won't hurt you." The child didn't understand his words, but maybe it understood his tone. It didn't back away. Jack tore a strip from his sleeve and gently wrapped the child's leg. He used the only clean cloth he had to press against the wound. He gave it water from the bottle tied to his belt. The child blinked at him, surprised. Then it leaned against him and slept. What Jack didn't know was that he was being watched behind a one-way glass. General Kalara studied the screen. She had expected fear or defiance, maybe even an escape attempt, but not this. The human was helping a Zyrine child, a species his people were at war with. She narrowed her eyes and muttered, "Strange." The next day, Kalara stepped into his cell. 2 guards flanked her. But she didn't need them. She was strong enough to kill him alone. Jack stood slowly, eyes meeting hers. His lip was cut and his hands still bore burns from the crash. But he stood tall. "Who are you?" she asked, voice flat. "Lieutenant Jack Carter," he replied. "Why did you come here?" "Recon mission." "Why did you help that child?" Jack didn't blink, because no one else did. Kalara studied him for a long moment. He didn't beg, didn't lie, didn't even try to win her favor. He simply answered with truth. She turned without a word and left the cell. Outside, her second-in-command hissed, "We should kill him." General Kalara didn't respond. She had seen something she didn't expect. A human who chose compassion when he had nothing to gain. The next morning, Jack was moved to a larger room with clean air and a working light. His wounds were treated, not fully healed, but better. A young alien medic dropped supplies near his bed. Confused but respectful, Jack looked around. Realizing this wasn't kindness, it was curiosity. They wanted to see what he would do next. That night, the child from his old cell came to visit. Hobbling on a splint made of alien metal, it brought him fruit wrapped in leaves, smiling shyly. Jack smiled back. He didn't understand its words, but the meaning was clear. "Thank you." In the control tower, Kalara watched again. Her eyes narrowed, her hand resting on her sword's hilt. Something was changing. and she didn't like not knowing what it meant. The human was no longer just a prisoner. He was a question she didn't yet have an answer for. But one thing was clear. Everything began to change the moment his ship fell. From the sky, and Kylara's world would never be the same again. The warrior's doubt begins. Kylara had led soldiers into burning skies and frozen trenches. She had broken enemies with her fists and crushed rebels with her glare. But this human was confusing her more than any battlefield ever had. He was not afraid, not angry, not even bitter. He was just calm. She had ordered him moved to a monitored chamber. She claimed it was to study his behavior more closely. But the truth itched beneath her skin. She just didn't want him locked in a cage anymore. Kylara walked into the training yard that morning, her soldiers lined up in silence, waiting for orders. But something had shifted. Whispers flew like dust between the ranks. They had seen the human help the injured, and now they looked at their general as if waiting for something new, as if she had changed just because he had. "Where's the prisoner?" her second-in-command asked. "Chamber 3. Kyla replied without looking. "He should be restrained, General." Kylara's jaw tightened. "He is under surveillance." She answered, "That is enough." But her words didn't settle her mind. Inside Chamber 3, Jack knelt beside a table of supplies. Not weapons, but medical tools, bandages, salves, alien herb gel, and even a plasma suture tool he had asked to help treat the wounded after a small explosion rocked the West Wing. And surprisingly, Kylara had approved. Now, Jack cleaned the wounds of a young soldier with trembling limbs. "Hold still," he said gently. "This will sting." The alien winced, but did not pull away. Jack worked quickly, efficiently. When he finished, he smiled and said, "Done." The soldier nodded, stood up slowly, and walked out without a word. But he looked back once, his expression no longer filled with fear. Jack had earned something rare: respect. From the upper platform, Kylara watched everything. She stood with her arms crossed, her thoughts grinding against each other. He had no reason to help, yet he did. He had no protection, yet he trusted her soldiers. She had been taught humans were treacherous, self-serving creatures, but this one acted like a healer, not a spy. Later that night, she stood outside his chamber, staring at the door. Her hand hovered above the scanner for a long moment before she touched it. The door hissed open, and Jack looked up from where he sat reading a translated Zyrene datapad. Kylara stepped in, her expression unreadable. "Why do you keep helping us?" she asked, without greeting. Jack raised an eyebrow, then set the pad down. "Because people need help," he said. "Doesn't matter what species they are." Kylara frowned. "That's not how wars are won." Jack gave a half-smile. "Maybe not, but it's how peace begins." Her mind rejected his words, but her heart did not. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "You're not what I expected." "Human? Neither are you," he replied softly. Kylara walked the corridors alone after that. Her boots echoed in empty halls as her thoughts swirled. Why was she even entertaining these ideas? He was still the enemy, wasn't he? But she remembered the child's smile, the soldier's nod, the calm in Jack's eyes, and a part of her, small but growing, whispered that maybe enemies weren't always what they seemed. That same night, in the outer camp, a squad of Zyrene scouts returned with 2 heavily injured soldiers. Their wounds were deep, and the medics struggled to keep up. Kylara arrived at the scene, and to her shock, Jack was already there. Someone had fetched him without asking. He had one hand pressing a bleeding artery and the other guiding a medic's shaky fingers. Kylara froze in place, watching as even her seasoned doctors obeyed his calm instructions. He had become more than a prisoner. He was acting like one of them after the crisis passed. Jack sat on a crate outside the medbay, breathing heavily. Kylara approached him, and this time, he didn't bring guards. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jack looked up at her, sweat still on his brow. "You're welcome," he said. "But next time, maybe don't wait to ask for help." She almost smiled, but didn't. Instead, she nodded and walked away, but her steps felt heavier. Her mind louder, in the war room later. Her second in command slammed a fist on the table. "This human is becoming a problem," he hissed. Kalara did not respond, not because she agreed, but because she no longer knew if that was true. Maybe Jack wasn't a problem. Maybe he was the beginning of something else, something none of them were ready for. And, as she stared at the star map on the wall, Kalara asked herself a question she had never asked before. What if this human wasn't the one being changed? What if she was? When the base is attacked, a quiet hum filled the base that night. The stars above the alien moon looked peaceful, but deep underground, something dark was stirring. Kalara stood alone in the command chamber, staring at the flickering maps on the wall. Jack had just left the med bay after helping another wounded patrol. She watched him go in silence, unsure whether she was losing control or gaining something more valuable than power. Then it happened. Without warning, the lights flickered red. A deep alarm howled through the walls like a beast in pain. Explosions shook the ground. Panels burst, sending sparks into the air. Kailara's comm crackled to life. Unknown forces breaching the south perimeter. Someone shouted, "There's Zirine, but not ours." Kailara's eyes widened. A rebel faction, one she thought had been destroyed months ago. But they were here now, attacking her base from within the shadows, and worse, they were Zirine like her. They would know all the defense weak points. "Defend the heart chamber," Kailara ordered. "And find the human." Jack had heard the alarm too. He sprinted down the corridor, grabbing a small plasma cutter from a storage locker. Soldiers ran past him, weapons drawn, shouting in their native tongue. He didn't understand every word, but he knew panic when he saw it. And something inside him clicked into action, near the medical wing. A young alien was pinned under fallen debris. Jack dropped beside her without thinking. "Hold on," he said, pressing the cutter to the metal. Sparks flew, smoke curled, and within seconds, he pulled the girl free. She looked at him like he was made of fire and lightning. Then he handed her a knife and said, "Go." At that moment, another explosion rocked the base. The wall nearby burst open, and 3 rebels in black armors stormed in. One raised a weapon toward the injured girl. Jack didn't think, he just moved. He tackled the rebel, punching hard and fast. The rebel hit the floor, stunned, but Jack didn't stop. He grabbed the weapon and fired, forcing the others to retreat. The girl ran to safety, but Jack was bleeding now. His arm had caught a shard of metal, and his breath came in short bursts. Kailara arrived seconds later, her soldiers behind her. She saw the broken wall, the scorched floor, and Jack wounded, standing over a dead rebel. Their eyes met through smoke and flickering light. He had saved one of her own again, without orders, without fear. Kailara raised her voice. "Protect him." And for the first time, her soldiers didn't question the command. The battle raged on for hours. Rebel forces moved like ghosts through the tunnels, but Jack didn't run. He helped guide injured soldiers to safety, rewired broken comms, and even stood side by side with Zirine warriors in close combat. His hands were human, but his actions were beyond species. Kailara fought beside him once, back to back, as they took down 2 rebels in a narrow corridor. She didn't see a prisoner anymore. She saw a partner. When the final explosion died and silence returned, bodies lay scattered through the halls. The base was scarred, but it still stood, and Kailara stood with it, her shoulders squared. Her blade bloodied, but her eyes searched for only one person. She found him slumped near the medwing, blood on his brow, eyes half closed. Kailara knelt beside him, pressing her hand to his neck. He was alive. Barely. Get him to the recovery pod, she ordered, her voice hard. Now, her tone allowed no argument. The medics obeyed at once, and all around her, soldiers whispered. The human had fought for them, bled for them, defended them, and now even their feared general bent beside him like he was precious. Later, in the quiet of the command room, Kylara sat alone. Jack's jacket rested on the chair beside her, torn but intact. She reached out, ran her fingers over the patch sewn into the sleeve. It read, Human Space Navy Pilot Carter. She whispered his name to the empty room. Not as a prisoner, not as a threat, but as someone who had risked everything for people who once caged. Him, from the edge of the shadows, her second-in-command spoke. He saved many lives, he admitted, but the Council won't care. Kylara stood slowly, her expression cold and steady. Then the Council is wrong, she said. He is no longer a prisoner, outside. Stars blinked in the sky like distant warnings. The war wasn't over, but something had changed forever in that base. And Kylara knew this human, this pilot, would be the reason her people's future looked different now. The bond grows stronger, sunlight filtered through the jagged clouds above the alien moon. The base was quiet now, still recovering from the rebel attack. Repair drones hummed as they patched walls and sealed damaged systems. But beneath the silence, something else had begun to heal too. Something that neither Kylara nor Jack could explain with words. Jack lay in the recovery chamber, his body floating in healing fluid. Sensors blinked gently, scanning his wounds. And regenerating torn muscle, Kylara stood behind the glass. Arms crossed, eyes fixed on him. He had saved her life again. Not with weapons, but with loyalty, the kind that couldn't be bought or ordered. When Jack opened his eyes after 2 days, Kylara was the first face he saw. You survived, she said simply. I'm tough, Jack replied. Voice raspy but smiling. Kylara didn't smile. But her eyes softened just a little. You've earned more than survival, she said. You've earned a place here. From that day, Jack was no longer watched. He was followed, but not by guards, by young warriors who wanted to hear his stories, by injured soldiers who trusted his hands more than their own medics, by curious minds who had never spoken to a human before. And through it all, Kylara watched quietly, always nearby, but never in the way. One evening, she joined him in the lower hangar. He was working on an old Zyrene scout ship, grease on his hands. You never stop fixing things, she said, approaching. Jack looked up, wiping his face with his sleeve. Guess I like helping things fly again. Kylara stepped closer, her gaze resting on the exposed engine. That ship hasn't flown in 6 years. Then it's overdue, Jack replied with a wink. She didn't laugh, but she didn't leave either. Instead, she helped him. She passed him tools, tightened bolts, even held a light while he crawled under the chassis. It was the first time anyone had seen their general with dirt on her hands. But no one dared comment not when she stood so close to the human with quiet respect in her eyes. That night, they sat beside the ship, watching the moonrise. Kylara broke the silence first. When I was young, I wanted to be a singer, she said, suddenly. Jack blinked, surprised. Seriously? She nodded slowly, her voice almost a whisper. But war found me first. Jack leaned back against the wall, his voice low. I wanted to be a painter. Kylara turned her head toward him. What? Stopped you. My brother died, he said. The words heavy. After that, I joined the Navy. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of grief, of memory, of unspoken understanding. Kylara looked at him and saw someone more than a pilot, more than a human. She saw a man shaped by loss. Like her, changed by battle. Like her, and still choosing to build instead of destroy. That confused her more than any enemy ever had. The next morning, the scout ship roared to life. Jack sat in the cockpit, Kylara beside him. The hangar gates opened wide, and for the first time in 6 years, the old ship rose into the sky. Cheers erupted below. And somewhere, deep inside Kylara's chest, a spark she thought long dead flickered to life. When they landed, her second-in-command pulled her aside. "General, the Council is watching," he warned. "They think you're getting too close to the human." Kylara didn't flinch. "Let them watch," she said. "Maybe they'll learn something." Later that night, she found Jack sitting on the edge of the observation deck, staring at the stars. "Do you regret saving me?" she asked him quietly. Jack looked at her and shook his head. "No," he said. "Do you regret not killing me?" Kylara didn't answer right away. Then she sat beside him, the wind brushing through her silver armor. "I don't know what I feel," she admitted, "but I don't want this to end." Jack nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's a beginning." They sat there until the moons rose. A warrior and her prisoner, no longer bound by chains, but by something far more dangerous and far more powerful. A bond born in war, tempered in trust, and now glowing with quiet fire. Whatever came next, neither of them would face it alone. The Council's warning asterisk, a dark transmission cut through the base's signal grid. It came with no voice, no face, only a symbol, the mark of the High Zyrine Council. Everyone froze when it appeared on the main screen. Even Kylara stood straighter, her jaw tight, her eyes unreadable. The message was clear and short. "Report to Citadel Prime, alone, immediately." Her second-in-command looked nervous. "You knew this would happen," he said. Kylara gave no reply. She just turned and left the chamber without another word. Jack watched her ship leave from the top deck. He didn't ask where she was going, but deep down, something felt wrong. Something was shifting in the air, like peace had come to Isley. Like war had simply paused to reload. Kylara entered the council chamber alone. 7 figures sat before her, cloaked in gold and black. They were the oldest voices of the Zyrine Empire. And they were angry. "You have allowed a human to influence your command," the High Speaker said coldly. "You let him live, walk freely, and even fly our ships." "He earned it," Kylara replied without flinching. "He fought for us, saved us, healed our wounded. A human cannot be trusted." Another elder hissed. "They are manipulators, deceivers, creators of false peace. They are also survivors," Kylara answered. Like us, the room fell quiet, but the tension only thickened. Finally, the High Speaker stood. "If you believe in him so deeply, then prove your loyalty." Kylara narrowed her eyes. "How?" she asked. "Kill him," came the answer. "In public, before your soldiers, before the Empire." Kylara's blood ran cold. For a moment, her mask of control cracked, but only for a second. Then she straightened and said, "I need time to prepare." "You have 2 days." The council declared, "Do not disappoint us again." She returned to the base with silence behind her eyes. Jack was waiting by the hangar bay, a small smile on his face. "Good news?" he asked, sensing the storm behind her silence. She didn't speak. She just walked past him, her hands clenched at her sides. That night, she didn't sleep. She stood alone in the training arena, striking empty air with her blade again and again. Each swing was harder, faster, angrier, until the blade cracked and snapped in her grip. She stood there, breathing hard, eyes burning. Jack found her there. Hours later, he saw the broken blade, the sweat on her brow, the fire in her eyes, and he knew. "What did they say?" he asked softly. Kylara didn't look at him. "They want you dead." Jack didn't react the way she expected. He didn't panic, didn't shout. He just nodded once and said, "Then you should run." Kylara turned sharply. "Run," she snapped. "That's not who you are." "Neither is killing a friend," Jack said calmly. "But they asked you to." Kylara felt the weight of the choice crushing her chest. Her orders were absolute. Her loyalty had never been questioned until now. Now everything was blurred. The warrior inside her demanded obedience. But something deeper, something older, whispered another path. "What will you do?" Jack asked. Her gently, she stared at him for a long time. Her voice stuck in her throat. Then she said the words she never thought she would speak. "I don't know." He stepped closer, eyes steady. "I trust you," he said. "No accusation, no begging, no fear. Just trust." Kylara closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life, the sound of orders faded. What remained was a single voice, her own, and it no longer belonged to the Empire alone. Escape or defiance, the arena was packed with Zyrene soldiers. Their boots echoed across the black stone as they gathered in a wide circle. Overhead, the red banners of the Empire waved without mercy. It was the place where traitors were judged, where shame was washed in blood. And today, the human stood at its center. Jack wore no chains. But the silence around him felt heavier than any metal. He looked calm to calm. Even the guards beside him kept glancing nervously toward the gates. Something didn't feel right. Kylara stepped into the ring, wearing full ceremonial armor. Polished silver plates curved along her arms and chest. Her eyes were hidden behind her war mask, but her fingers trembled against her blade. She had made her decision, and now the galaxy would watch her make it real. A voice thundered from the tower above. "By order of the High Council, the human known as Jack Carter stands accused of corrupting a Zyrine general. Her punishment will be sealed in his death." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some stared in horror, some in approval. Jack said nothing. He only looked at Kylara. Waiting, she stepped forward slowly. Blade raised, every eye was on her. Every breath held, but Kylara did not strike. She stopped 2 steps from him and turned to the crowd. "My orders are clear," she said loudly. "But they are wrong." The crowd shifted, confused. Kylara removed her war mask and let it fall to the floor. "I will not kill a man who saved your children," she said, her voice steady. "I will not murder the one who stood between you and death." A soldier near the front shouted, "Are you defying the council?" Kylara raised her chin. "I am." Gasps turned to shouting. Weapons began to rise, but Kylara had planned for this. From the outer gates, her most loyal soldiers stormed in. Not many, only 50, but each one stood firm, blades drawn, armor marked with her family crest. They formed a wall between Kylara and the Empire's wrath. Jack didn't move. He simply stood beside her. Calm as always, she tossed him a blade without looking. "You said you trusted me." She said, "I still do," Jack replied, catching it. Easily, chaos broke loose. The arena became a war zone. Council enforcers tried to force their way in, but Kylara's troops fought like lions, and in the middle of it all, Akala stood back to back just like during the rebel assault. Only now, they weren't fighting rebels, they were fighting her own people. Blood stained the stone floor. But Kylara's voice never trembled to those who would rather follow truth than blind power. She shouted, "Follow me now." More soldiers broke from the crowd and joined her. They had seen the human fight, seen him heal, seen him protect. They knew the council had lost the people. Not because of betrayal, but because of silence too long obeyed. When the dust settled, dozens lay wounded. The banners had been ripped down. Kylara stood in the center of the ring again this time. With Jack beside her and loyal warriors at her back, she looked at the sky as drops of soft rain began to fall. Then she whispered, "We are no longer theirs." That night, they fled the base in silence. Kylara, Jack, and the ones who believed in something more than war. They flew into the unknown, hunted, marked, and free. As their ship pierced the clouds, Jack looked at her and asked, "Where are we going?" Kylara didn't hesitate. "Somewhere we can build what the Empire never could." Jack smiled and leaned back in his seat. I liked the sound of that, for the first time in her life. Kylara didn't feel like a soldier. She felt like a leader, and for the first time, she wasn't carrying the war alone. The greatest ally *, the stars above, burned brighter now. Not because the galaxy had changed, but because someone finally dared to dream of something different. A stolen Zyrine warship drifted quietly through the edge of neutral space. Inside, it carried fugitives, warriors, and one human who was never supposed to matter. Jack Carter stood at the main viewport, sipping something close to coffee. He had learned the ship's systems, rebuilt broken conduits, and even repaired the old translator. Core. Now. Most of the crew could speak to him in words, not just gestures, but it wasn't the language that made him feel close to them. It was the way they listened. Behind him, Kylara walked into the command room without her armor. She wore simple black flight gear now, a symbol of who she had chosen to become. No longer a general of the Empire, but something freer and harder to define. "We've been tracking merchant signals from the Yoren system," she said, handing him a datapad. "If we head there, we can trade for food and fuel." Jack nodded, scanning the numbers, and "Maybe some new boots," he added with a grin. Kylara raised an eyebrow. "Yours still hold together." "Barely," he replied. "Like my spine," she chuckled under her breath, quiet but real. Moments like these had become more common. They didn't speak about war much anymore. But they didn't forget it either. Later, Jack helped a group of Zyrine children run flight drills on the deck. They called him Skyblood now, a nickname. That began as a joke, but stuck. One of them asked if he would ever go back to Earth. He smiled sadly and said, "Maybe," but in truth, Earth felt further away than ever that evening. The crew gathered around the small mess hall table. Kylara stood at the head, her hands behind her back. "I never thought I'd say this," she began, "but today marks one full cycle since we left the Empire." Whispers filled the room, some with pride, some with fear. "We are still hunted," she continued, "still exiled, but we are alive, we are free, and we are something they never expected." She looked at Jack, letting the silence settle. "We are more than what they made us," she said, "and I am not alone." She raised a glass not with wine, but with purified coolant. It was bitter and warm, but it meant survival to the crew, she said. "And to the man who reminded me what strength really looks like." Jack lifted his glass, eyes shining. "Kylara," he said quietly, "I was just trying not to die." Everyone laughed, but Kylara only shook her head. "No," she said, "you did more than that. You gave us something no order ever could. Hope." Later that night, as the ship floated in silence, Jack stood alone on the observation deck. Kylara joined him, arms folded as she stared into the stars. "Do you ever wonder how it all happened?" he asked. All of this, Kylara didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I took a prisoner, and instead, I found my greatest." "Allie," he turned to her, eyes soft. "And what do you call me now?" She looked at him with no mask, no rank, and no fear. "I call you Jack," she said simply. Just Jack, for the first time. That felt like enough. The ship moved forward into the unknown, but this time, they weren't running. They were building something new together. And, in the eyes of a once-feared general and a once-lost human pilot, a future brighter than any star had already begun.